Beautiful. Well, welcome, ladies. It's great to have you here. It's great to have you jumping on. I've actually just started. My name is Nat Ferrier. I am the founder of the group that I think both of you have just jumped into on and meet up at the moment. And it's lovely to have you both joining me here today. So we're here to talk about fearbusting, how to break out of the Groundhog Day loop of fear for good, because who doesn't want to do that with fear, right? Now, this is, so I just wanted to say welcome to you all. It's really beautiful to have you here. This is actually, this image that's on the screen right now, this is actually the last, before COVID, this was the last live Sydney Leaders and Public Speakers event that we had at the end of February last year. So it's there will be another of those coming back shortly in the next little bit. Let me just pause this for a second because I'm just going to jump out of. All right, there we go. It's going to pop into that mode. Yep, that should be right. That should be better. Just going to pop my notes off the screen for you. There we go. That's better. All right. And then I'm just going to share this again. There we go. Okay, so I would love to hear just quickly a little bit about you and your background, what you do, what drew you to this particular webinar tonight. Did you want to share a little bit about you, ladies? Keeney first, perhaps.
Okay. Hi, ladies. I'm Keeney. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Well, I've recently represented in a visa webinar. My role, I'm a licensed migration agent. So it was a good opportunity to, I guess, have some practice in the public speaking. And what drove me to join the group, obviously wanted to, learn some tips and get better at myself, public speaking. Yeah, and I think that'll be a good skill as well for not necessarily just representing, but also like in the, public speaking and socializing.
For sure, it's transferable, right?
That's right.
Yeah, beautiful. And there will be plenty of things in that realm to come in the next little bit. You'll get a little bit on the fear piece and the being able to align our state and choose our state and be a bit more confident beyond that will come out of tonight. And then some of that will also come over the next few events and webinars. So it's beautiful to have you here. And great to have that clarification, because I wasn't sure, were we talking like visas to get into the country, or were we talking MasterCards and visas when we mentioned that? So I was like, oh, I get it. Now we're talking migration. So just to clarify for those following along at home later.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Beautiful. Thank you.
No worries.
Just check, is it Shan is your first name?
Yeah, that's right, Shan.
First name? Beautiful. Welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Thanks for spending the time to do this session. So for myself, I'm a software engineer. So I've been working for, I guess, like 10 years in that field, and so I'm looking to do like some leadership course, or not so much as public speaking. I think more on like leadership, and because I am stepping into I guess lead engineer role, which I just want to explore more, like how that I think your course might help me, or
For sure. I come from a family full of engineers, actually. and have worked in consulting with a few engineering companies prior and talked to a few leaders about that as well. But I'm curious as to, like, is there a specific aspect of leadership skill that you're after? Or
I don't know, because I haven't looked into them. I guess like more generally like communication.
Yep.
I guess effective communication. Yeah, that's my main thing. Yeah.
Beautiful. I do have some stuff and we talk about the one-on-one side of that, and we talk about the actual group presenting side of that as well in some of the webinars and things that we do. So there's absolutely some stuff on that to come. I'll just do a quick welcome to, there may be some people replaying, watching along for this later, because I did share it to my other Women's Leaders and Public Speakers actually exists also on Facebook and on LinkedIn at present. So there may be some people who jump in later. So just saying hi to you as you're watching the replay. And there's a couple of guys registered as well. So when you're watching the replay, whether you came from Sydney Leaders and Public Speakers or you came through LinkedIn or however you got here, welcome. Great to have you here as well, energetically in spirit after the fact. Little welcome to you. And Anne has just joined us as well. Hi, Anne.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. We were just going around and just sort of sharing for everyone who's managed to make it past the gauntlet of making it in tonight. Is there anything in particular that drew you here tonight to this particular webinar and to this group? Did you want to share a little bit with us about that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, am I on the right one? The Fearbusting?
Fearbusting, yes.
Yeah. Well, I just, I am a sort of a leader myself, but I just find it really disconcerting that where I work, most of the leadership is through fear and loathing, and I don't fit that mold. Hence, I don't tend to get the jobs. It's very sad actually, because a lot of creative people probably getting disillusioned with the situation. But yeah, and I just refuse to fit into that mold. I refuse to fit into that mold because it's not me. You don't need to lead like that by treating people like children and clipping their wings. And I refuse to accept the status quo that is.
Thank you for being brave in doing that. And I know it is, like, I think there's us. I have a creative background as well. In some respects, I had performing arts. I did contemporary arts drama and all the contemporary arts when I did that originally, and did art therapy at one point in my training.
Right.
Yeah, cool. We'll have lots to talk about down the line, I think. But yeah, it is really disheartening, isn't it, when people are still stuck in the old authoritarian, the old power over, and yeah, talking down to you like your 5 model. And I'm noticing, particularly because I'm 39, but I've been working with a lot of millennial leaders, and there is just such a lot of tension and angst between, it's across industries, because I have health background as well. And I think across many sectors, lots of other leadership coaches and trainers that I'm talking to are all talking about this tension where you've got kind of with senior leadership, you've got some of them that are just kind of sticking in there and are not going to change ever in the way that they do things, because they'll stick around, they'll get their awards, they'll get their accolades and their payouts, and they'll retire and, leave their legacy for their kids, leave their legacy for work, and they're not interested in changing the paradigm. And then some of them are I'm working with who are pushing to change it, but they've got resistance. And then the poor Gen Xers and some of the millennials below are like sort of butting heads, and there's this whole kind of, they just want to get in there and they want to change it. And then I feel like part of my job right now is just kind of supporting you to stay in long enough that you're the one who's rising up to the top, so that you can remake it, right, in this image of a better style, more servant-based, community-based, a different style that we might want to create instead, maybe.
Agree with that.
Yep. Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing a bit about where you're all at. I'll tell you a little bit more about me as well. Oh, where am I not? If I go back to, why is that not? All right, we'll go for here. I'm using a different platform tonight to what I normally use, so text being slightly weird on me, so my apologies. But you might have seen in amongst, if you've come, some of you are new to the group, so you may have read the little blurb about me down the bottom, or you may not have. But basically, my background, I had been working internationally. I had been an International Coaching Federation certified, recognized coach. I'm also a mentor, trainer, and a speaker. And I've just written a book on owning your voice. And I run leadership development and readiness and public speaking programs and events that help women and occasionally the odd bloke and a few others in there as well to overcome fear and be more confident, healthy, empowered, and on purpose in our work. And my background, as I was saying, there is some performing arts, there's creative in there. I studied a Bachelor of Biological Science. After that, counselling, art therapy, before I did coaching. And the majority of my work has been mostly in the health emergency services and community services, registered training organisations, as well as a bit of creative and private practice. While I was studying everything, I went up the health management side of things and worked in, as I was just saying to Sian before, come from a family full of engineers and had worked in a few consultancies along the way to do with that as well, in a contract capacity a couple of times, but lots of RTOs. And eventually, from my private practice, because I used to specialize initially in stress management, working with women with stress management and women's health as well, overcoming or building a life that you love through and beyond stress and women's health challenges. And I was very big at that point on helping women in particular, women who'd been through stuff in life and been through some major challenges, to overcome them, to be able to re-embrace a purpose and create a life that they really love beyond that. So that was always my motivation, and helping them find their voice and find their passion within that has always been important to me. And out of that, I got into speaking. Out of that, I got invited to be, from all the admin management as well, I was running clinics, and I got invited to be a mentor and business coach other practitioners in building their businesses. So I worked on helping them with getting their local practices up and running and online businesses up and running, as well as got invited to work with some other entrepreneurs who are 8-figure entrepreneurs in the conscious business space, they would call it. Sort of small business, again, coaches and practitioners, in supporting them to step up and shine. So that all just sort of organically sort of just exploded for me by itself after initial private practice. And these days I'd sort of franchised through some of them initially, and then have moved into doing my own thing and run these events as well as the Sydney Leaders and Public Speakers events. Last year I launched How to Shine Online as like an online equivalent when COVID hit and we couldn't do that anymore, as a means of talking about leadership skills and public speaking, and also showcasing speakers from a range of different industries and some women who are pushing the boundaries in non-traditionally female industries as well, or male-dominated industries. So we'd sort of provided a range of opportunities for not all of them were women's specific events, but some of them had mostly female speakers, and then some of them we sort of had non-gender specific. But yeah, so really excited about offering opportunities to both for speakers to step up in that respect, as well as to learn. But the tricky thing was for me in my journey that I had more than a bit of trauma in my past, to say it lightly. In a lot of ways, in childhood, I grew up with a lot of communal narcissist rage. He wouldn't have identified it as that, but my mother died when I was 9 and I was living in the middle of nowhere trying to navigate that. And there was all kinds of other unfortunate stuff that happened along the way. Some life events, lots of people in family getting sick, and then some was like assault things and other things that developed. But it really kicked up a notch when I was studying performing arts and started to be doing comedy pieces on stage with the likes of Luke Hemsworth and a few other people that some of you would know today. And I think there was one respect, I just wasn't ready for all that attention yet, in that I didn't know, I wasn't good enough with my boundaries and communication skills to be firm enough. I was very sort of girly, try and laugh it off when they'd push my boundaries at that point. And so my nose were a bit watered down and they weren't really getting it. So I ended up having this big fear of being in that public presence and being around people, because in the audience respect, which was tricky because I wanted to do that for work. But yeah, so I had this bad run of, there was a Californian guy I was seeing, I was living on residence, going to uni across the road. And there was one day where he picked me up and tried to like deadlift me above his head, and that was all very well, but he dropped me over the back of it and I hit the ground. Luckily, somebody had put a drink in my hand a little bit before, but I had a performance that night. So I was trying to be good, but it was just enough that I didn't break my fall. And all the specialists told me afterwards, it's really lucky that you had something to drink, that you didn't break your fall, because if you broke your fall, you would be in a wheelchair right now. So that was my saving grace, but it took me 10 years to get over that. And there was a bit of a fear thing of the power of groups, I guess, and the group dynamic kind of popped in around there, as well as I'd had in primary school, I'd had a group thing that happened, and that struck the fear into me of groups at that point. So when it came to me becoming a speaker, it was, you'd think sometimes people go, oh, you've done performing arts, so you would be really good in front of audiences. And I'm like, but you get this false sense of security when you're playing a character in front of an audience, because you could hide behind the character. It's like Lady Gaga and Sia and some singers, like in that respect, they talk about this. If you hear them talking about, when they're interviewed, talking about their journey online, that they'll talk about, that they use those personas at times. And Sia used her hair over her eyes to literally hide and create some distance between the audience and what was going on. And I realized later, when it came to public speaking and it came to putting my expertise around women's health in front of audiences, because I started getting invited to speak at lots of festivals and events. And all of a sudden I was panicking, and like nearly pass out level panicking about it. And then there was all this stuff that I had to heal that. I had to work out what was going on with that and how did I overcome that, which sort of led me into, in private practice, then learning a lot more about trauma work and becoming trauma informed, so that I could get a handle on what was going on with that, as well as I explored about every modality I could get my hands on in the personal development space, trying to learn, how does one not freak out in front of an audience, and or when you're being challenged by authority in some respects, like when you're in a leadership situation, when you've got to step up to manage a community online, or you've got to step up to manage a team, or if you've got to deliver challenging news to people, like how do you deal with that angst and those nerves in that? Because I was definitely terrified there for a bit. And part of that was part of the experiences that I'd been through with men. If there was men in the audience, it was worse. I noticed as I did some of the speaking engagement, my anxiety would go up 50 times worse. And so I went through a bit of a journey to resolve all that. And that's why I'm here today, talking about this today, because I'm like, there's a few things that I learned that I think are beneficial that I'd like to share with all of you, that I think could certainly help you both, for everyone who's here, who's wanting to build their confidence in the leadership skill sense and the communication skill sense, as well as in the public speaking sense. There's a part of this picture here, and a part of the picture that isn't always talked about by everyone. I've just been working on a model recently that sort of tries to sum up all the things that we really need to think about to totally break out of the loop and get on top of our fear. So I'll go through that in a little bit. First, I wanted to talk about why exactly it's so important that we get on top of this and get on top of this fear thing. What are the costs of if we don't get past the fear? What does it end up costing us in terms of opportunity and the things that we want to do? So in terms of what we love and what we're passionate about, what do we end up surrendering when we play into the fear, when something comes up around it? What are the costs in terms of, like we were mentioning earlier, that some people are hoping that this might have flow-on benefits for communicating in the other aspects of life as well. What situations, because of fear and because of our fears of communication, have we potentially run away from or stepped away from, or what relationships have we not invested in, or opportunities in terms of leadership or work have we not invested in because there was a part of us that had some fear around whether we were enough to handle it or whether we could handle difficult people. For women in particular, there's a scary lot of work stats that I looked at last year on women applying for jobs that were talking about the jobs and how comfortable women feel to apply for a job that they're not specifically, they don't deem themselves to have tick all the boxes in terms of the position description, in terms of the required criteria. Like this survey looked at that, and basically the outcome of what they found was that men tended to proceed with applying for a job anyway, even if they had maybe 70% of the things there that they'd done. That research said that men would proceed anyway with the job application and go forward, and in many cases they may have progressed. Whereas women, the moment that we saw a few that we're like, oh, I'm not sure if I can actually have that, or I'm not sure if I meet that criteria, we've got more of a tendency, apparently, according to the research, to then not apply and discount the opportunity because we assume that if we're not meeting those couple of criteria, that's it, that excludes us. So that I found it's just a little bit scary, isn't it? In terms of like to think about the opportunities that we might have left on the table in that respect, out of being worried that we're not enough. Whereas there can often be workarounds for that, and people will often be willing to talk to you about if there's more training that you have to do or other things that we need to pick up.
No, I definitely agree with that. I've seen people, males in my job and I looked at the criteria, and I know for a fact they didn't have all that criteria, but they obviously just negotiated their way into that job, which is, whereas I know women in the role who could have probably gone, but they went, oh no, I haven't got that master's, or I haven't got that, but they could have negotiated that they were going to work towards it.
Totally.
The guy didn't have it either, by the way, but it's just confidence. It's absolute confidence.
It really is, isn't it? That's exactly the point, is that it's pure, just quote unquote, they've got the balls to go for it, and they're encouraged to do that and praised for that, whereas we've just not quite found our groove in that quite yet. And our groove in being able to go, well, it's okay if they say no as well. That door just closes and we move on to the next one. But it's all these things we're navigating now that we've got the power to ask for things and the power to be rejected for things too. This is all these fears that come up, right? Around, I mean, what if it doesn't? And then we've got to learn to deal with rejection, and we've got to learn to deal with the fears of the other possibilities of succeeding and failing, but also succeeding. What if I succeed and then, oh, I've got to deliver? And what if I can't deliver? Like, that's another huge one for women, like the fear of success, and how am I going to handle it? And can I keep it up? Can I keep delivering if I get in there? And that could be part of the source of the panic attack as well. Is there any others that anyone wants to pop into the chat box or immediate fears that you just thought of, that you think that you've seen or that you've experienced women facing, or people full stop facing and stepping into leadership? For any others?
Yeah, I guess just afraid of what other people think of you. Yeah, just afraid, like if you get asked some questions that you can't answer, something like that. Yeah.
And whether does that then make you look not professional if you don't have the answer? And how do you handle it in a way that you come off still looking helpful and professional, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But it's a big fear in the interim. And also loss of tribe is a huge one for women. And that goes back millennia for women to the times where we were more dependent upon men. And it had massive implications at times if we upset the alpha and we were no longer in favor, like in high society. And I've got part of my background Scottish, part of my background's English. I mean, in both respects, and in a lot of places, no matter what level that you were at in some of those cultures, like if you fell out of favor with the clan leaders, you were in trouble, right? You might end up poor and starving on the street, and you had children to think about. And we had to navigate all that somehow. And there's still, even from all the way back to cavemen kind of days, if you subscribe to some of the theories around how things were back then, there's lots of primal fear about the risks of, what's that movie? Oh, Netflix. I don't know if you guys watch Netflix or you ladies watch Netflix, but there was the Alpha movie with the wolf. They talk about the story of it's basically telling the story of how people initially and wolves first became domesticated, or dogs first became domesticated, when they told the story about how that happened. And yeah, like you see in that the implications of like even the teenage boys and the adult men, like if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, like whole herds of animals or packs of wolves just suddenly running through the group and just picking off a human. Like once upon a time we had that primal memory in us somewhere that was that risk if you weren't in amongst the tribe, and you didn't want to upset the tribe in that respect, or it was a matter of survival if you didn't. So there can be lots of all these primal things that are underlying in terms of our fear of upsetting people that can run pretty deep in that respect, and pretty old patterning. So we might move on to this
on that comment about fear of upsetting people. Yeah, because
yes.
I just think it's sort of I'm talking about my place. It's sort of some workforces are quite toxic. Because it's professional to actually say what you think.
Yes.
Not swearing your head off and acting like a maniac. What you think could be, or in a proactive way, and yet it just doesn't happen in my place because of the paradigms of the management. It's like, well, we're going to do that and that's it, and nobody says anything. It's a powerless situation, I mean, it's really quite sad. I think it's actually happening in our politics, actually, because there's no power people anymore. There's no people power, rather, and I look at other nations like Spain, and I mean, they've been through a lot, but yeah. I've been to Spain. I've got a friend over there, and I've witnessed people of power. They refuse to get on the bloody bus, which I just happened to be going from one place to another, because the air conditioner wasn't work, and they all bloody refused, the whole bus. I mean, it doesn't matter if you were going to get late or not, just somewhere. The bus driver had to call another bus. I mean, I was just people power, I mean, you just don't. It's sad because Australia used to have people power, and I think what happens in our politics sometimes gets mimicked in everywhere else.
Like well, there's evidence of it, and there's a lot of financial agenda driving it, right? You can feel and you can see where people want to take a stand, but they back down because, I'm going to lose these people, or I'm going to lose these parties. And even some of the campaigns that you see, like sometimes you can sort of see, totally hear you. And it's definitely, but at one point or another, like that change has got to, like with a lot of the issues that we're having, like with COVID and with climate change having come up and other sources of fear in amongst all that, like something's got to shift before too long.
And you should be able to say what you think could happen and not feel that you're going to be vilified, you know. That's
Totally.
should be, again, especially if you're in a leadership type of role, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even more so, you know. So
Yeah.
But yeah.
Good old Stephen Covey talked about in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, didn't he? He talked about the whole, and actually in the 13 behaviors of high trust of, I think it's his son or his family that came below him, that they've produced the 13 behaviors of high trust. They talk about in that as well, straight talk. Yeah. So being able, just like Brené Brown says as well, about being able to authentically share your truth from a heart-centered place around what you need. It's definitely a leadership skill that is required, that you've got to be able to tell it like it is in certain moments and give feedback and give people clear direction and clear instruction, right? And as you're saying, like, it's also so important that we be able to listen before we speak. It's one of the most important skills for us to develop as speakers and leaders as well. Listen to understand before you speak to be understood, right? Got it. Thank you for your perspective and your wisdom. I'm glad we got to put that in too. That's going to come under our one-on-one communication skills. There's a workshop coming up soon, and I'll do another webinar talking about that as well. So we will go into that in a bit more depth at one point as well. I wanted to now talk about this little model that I came up with. So I was sitting one day and I was like, how do I sum up all the factors that impact us in terms of everything that can contribute to us experiencing fear in the world or getting stuck in the fight-flight loop? This was the little model that came out for me. So I kind of divided it into quadrants in terms of, on the left-hand side, you've got the collective, and on the right-hand side, you've got personal. So both the boxes on the left-hand side are pretty much things that are experienced by everyone. And on the right-hand side, they're mostly more internal processes and more individual to the person. There's exceptions. You'll spot the exceptions in there as well as to where things apply to multiple boxes and across other ones. But the predominant relationship in those, this is what I've used to describe that. And so some of those factors, I think, are sociological in terms of the collective, the groupthink that the kinds we were just talking about just then, right? In terms of the workplace, that there's cultural memes that have existed for a long time and dynamics that have existed for a long time that we're all subjected to or playing out, and whether we consciously learned them or we didn't, like they're ingrained in a part of the system and where we grew up surrounded by them, grew up with the education system. Some of them are in there, some of them are related to work, some of them are related to political, some of them are related to gender. Like one of the big things with fear that I talk about in my book for women, like even just the notion that we women, as in biological XX, biologically, genetically women, are regarded as being less strong physically than men, right? Even just to have that one belief ingrained in women everywhere, or anyone who identifies as being a woman or identifies as being physically weaker than a man, then automatically creates a heap of fear, because all of a sudden you're running this paradigm that says, oh, everywhere I go, I need to be afraid now, because if a man attacks me, I'm potentially at risk. So there are beliefs like that that are running associated with gender underneath that are a part of, especially for us as women leaders and speakers, that's a big one that we might have to look at some point. Is that one playing out for us? But there can be lots to do with culture, depending on what culture you grew up with, in terms of your family dynamics as well. I keep thinking of examples of, you see the generational things when you watch parents and you watch their teenage children or you watch their kids, you know, you get the funny movies pop up on social media sometimes about the kid who's speaking. You can so tell what came out of their mouth is just their parents' beliefs 101. because they probably haven't even experienced it themselves, but sometimes you get that transfer and then we just pick up these things. I know my dad used to tell me about my mother, because my mother actually passed on when I was 9. She died of leukemia. But when I was about 33 or 34, my dad had said to me that, I don't know how you do it, because like she was a social worker. They never had conversations in front of me about her work and everything that was going on. She never, like, there was things that I could not possibly have known about her, that he said that I do them now and I become them. And for some, it's like it just got transferred and he's got no idea how, because she never talked about it. It's not like she ever taught it to me, but the mother like daughter, like it just came out in me. So there's just like, there's some things that whether we genetically pick it up or whether it's like an energetic blueprint or it's a psychological thing. I mean, we do as when we're in the womb, and genetically speaking, I mean, we do pick up an imprint of our mother's nervous system, right? There's just all these little things that, and that could be another thing that's contributing to our experience of anxiety. And depending on how much anxiety you experienced at birth, either your genes for that will be switched on or they won't be. The ones that, because there's a set of genes that we have that are sort of more permanent, and then there's the ones that environmentally get switched on and off all the time in response to what's going on. So that can be another thing. And then the occupational, social, romantic, and sexual, there's a whole heap of those to do with relationships as well, right? And now that we live in the lovely era of LGBTIQA, I mean, pick a sub category in which everyone's got its own set of complexities, right? In terms of relational dynamics and how things, like what's expected or how things are done or what the unspoken rules are around such things. There's so much under that heading. And yeah, so any one of those, there can be at times, some of those can be playing out for us. Then there's the cognitive ones. So I mean, this covers all the way back to basic learning theory, right? When we learn things when we're a child, when we see something, it has a consequence, either positive or negative, and we develop an association between what happened and a consequence. This is covering the process of learning in that respect and learning what behaviors do and don't serve us, as well as the process of thinking in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, like the process of my thoughts end up having a role in creating my emotions, which may or may not dictate how I choose to react or respond. And then there's the actions that I take based on that. In reality, in this day and age, there is research that says that it's a bit more complex than that, because that pathway can operate in multiple directions in terms of there could be things going on in your body that feed back to your brain as well. But that's one way of sort of explaining the simple notion of thoughts. What we think has an impact in terms of what we feel, and then what we do. So that comes under that heading. And then through the combination of those, I mean, we end up, thanks to beautiful memory, we end up laying down tracks in our brains, neural pathways that sort of link back to what our past experiences were around that. So we can quick reference for reference later, is this going to be dangerous or is this going to be something I should do? And the whole while we're building layers onto, the more that something continues to happen again and again, we build beliefs around, okay, so that's the way it is. This is my belief around this. And then we construct whole stories on top of that as events happen, and we start to construct both our identity starts to get hooked into the story that we have about our life and how things were. And then that helps shape and define part of our identity and our personality as well. And there's just more layers and more neural pathways stack on top. And then there's the part where we develop coping strategies to stressful things in life. And then what ones of those have we developed, and what habits or programs have we ultimately got in through a process of repeating all those thoughts and all those beliefs and what they've led us to do. Then you get in these habits and programs. So that's often very individual. Some of that may be transferred from others, but the way that it plays out in terms of, if we could scientifically measure everything on here, like the cognitive, I mean, it's a lot more individually. If you line two individuals up against each other and compared what's going on in their brain and what they're thinking day to day, cognitive's not going to be the same for two people, for two different people, right? Whereas sociological might be similar. And yeah, so that's cognitive for you. Feel free to pop in the chat box if any of you have any questions in the process of this, but I'm just going to run through the two, and then we'll talk about fight flight a little bit more. So then the universal aspect down the bottom one's a physiological. Up the top is more like in the mental realm, or it's sort of a thought process, or it's things that we can't necessarily see, but it's in some way a mental process. And down the bottom is physiological things that can be measured and that we can see, that are physically, take a physical form. So there's the universal ones on the left that can also impact how, can be reasons why, they can be contributing factors to when we experience fear. So these ones are fairly fixed though, for everyone on the left-hand side. So that's hence laws and theories are generally regarded as that's the way it is kind of things. And they work fairly consistently time after time, right? So for example, biology, like processes of cell division, or for chemistry, like the process of your blood oxygen saturation occurring, like processes like that are fairly fixed. And in physics as well, right? Whether you prescribe to the old traditional Newtonian and thermodynamics kind of dropping an apple from a height and it will then drop, and that's what happens as a law, or getting into the quantum energetics and quantum mechanics and the complexities of what everybody's starting to research and talk about in that realm. That can be another aspect that I thought was worth putting on this list. And then there's the natural laws and kind of spiritual laws, but natural laws, because I think if you think from an Indigenous standpoint, like they would sort of talk about it in terms of natural laws of how they believe things play out in the natural world and on this earth that we live in. And some of those tend to be, yeah, they're pretty fixed. So, but they apply basically everyone's experience of them. Whereas on the right-hand side, these again, lots of people will again experience, some of these can be very similar, like again, biochemical processes, like the process of us having a neurotransmitter for a particular emotion are fairly consistent, but the actual emotions that we feel at any given time and the combination of them, if you line two people up against each other, aren't, right? And how our energy is, and how, when I say energy, this is as much about our heartbeat and the electromagnetic field that's around us. Like a lot of our organs have an electromagnetic field of our own that we can measure on an ECG or an EEG, or we pick up on with any number of devices in the respective energy. Like people can be going through changes that, again, some aspect of that is consistent and some aspects different. And then there's epigenetics. We were talking about before, genes that turn on and off in response to the environment. Now, we might all have certain ones, and they're pretty close. Some of them are pretty close, but we also have this tiny little bit of variation that makes us who we are. So it's individually adapted, right? And then how illnesses play out and our microbiology and our gut. Microbiology is a huge thing in terms of anxiety and managing fear. The microbes, our healthy bacteria, have this ability to communicate with our nervous systems via the gut-brain axis. So they're a huge part of the fight-flight activation and how our anxiety is, because they'll communicate messages back about whether we do or don't have enough nutrients, or they don't have enough nutrients. Even Candida as well will communicate back to you if it thinks it's starving and make you want sugar cravings, research says. So there can be heaps of things in that respect that, and again, it plays out very individually because no person's microbiome has exactly the same organisms in it. And nervous system, neurochemistry wise, again, similar, but not the same. No person's neural. If you've ever seen the movie, The The Butterfly Effect, and you watch Ashton Kutcher as he goes through the different timelines and his neural pathways in his brain rearrange, which I think is a little mildly unrealistic, because I think he'd probably be out for 2 weeks at least, if not more, if that really happened. That's a lot of healing and a lot of change to fix in a hurry. But the point was around the complete restructuring, right? And how his identity completely shifts. And everybody's different. Everybody's version is completely individual for that. So this is part of the thing that, again, when we're trying to lessen our fear and lessen our anxiety, all of these factors are contributors, but they're very individual. And if you try and test 2 people in a study, like, you won't get the same results for 2 people, or you won't be able to repeat the same thing, because in the same way, in a standard scientific study way, it's more, you get qualitative measures of what the change is, because the alignment of these things will never be the same for 2 people, which is why it's hard to treat these things. And I think why maybe the medical world, in some respects, CBT is regarded as the gold star standard of managing anxiety, but it's not a complete system in itself. And I think there's other things that we miss. And then there's trauma on top of that, and how trauma develops for any given person in terms of what they've experienced that was stressful, that had such an imprint upon them that they ultimately, it left a mark on their system that has to be resolved later. Though, again, that can be highly individual for each person, even though the mechanism of the fight-flight response is fairly consistent. Does that make sense? So, does anyone have any questions about that before I move on, about that model? Oh, good. Okay, question time. And I'd love to hear from all of you around this. So the question is, what does everyone tell you to do to get over fear? What things have you been told in your lifetime about how you should cope with and deal with fear? Does anyone want to, feel free to, I think you've got a little emoji to put your hand up, or I can just go down from the top of the screen, either or raise your hand, maybe actually physically raise your hand if you got a thought. And I feel like you've got a thing. What do you want to share? What have people told you about how to get over fear, Anne?
Well, sorry, I keep unmuting him. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. All good.
No, well, the usual things like to breathe slowly and stuff like that. The physical things, you know, like maybe go for a walk. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Yeah, I can only think of physical things. Nothing really constructive. I mean, those things do help.
Yeah.
To breathe and basically, sometimes, often the saying is to overcome fear, you got to go through the fear. You got to get in contact with it.
Yeah.
It's always fine.
Face it.
Fearful.
Drink the monster. The big shadow on the wall, fear monster. You face it, like plates and shrieks. So that one, thank you. Any others? Has there anything else that anyone else has ever been told about how to manage fear?
Is it in terms of public speaking, or?
Could be to do with anything in life. Could be to do with work, or it could be to do with anything in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't really have much experience of having fear. Maybe because growing old. Anyway, for public speaking, I think just prepare.
Yep.
As much prepare as you want. I used to prepare 3 hours just for 5 minutes. Yeah. And that really helped.
Brilliant. Oh, me too. I'm a bit of an over preparer as well, because I find that definitely helps cut your nerves by a massive amount if you feel like you're in control of the process. So thank you for sharing that one. And yeah, I do find a lot of, you can see it, and I can see it running, practice events sometimes when people, I know when they haven't rehearsed. I can see it, I can feel it when they haven't rehearsed, and then they've put together a presentation, but they haven't practiced it, and they come in and they try and wing it, and it goes overtime and they blow out, and I can just, all of a sudden you can see the chaos kick in about 5 minutes before they're about to do it, and then all the questions happen and they start to freak out. It's like, oh no, because they realize that they're not as in control of it as they want to be, and then your anxiety shoots through the roof. So that's a great one that you just named in terms of being able to, the value of preparation is massive in terms of rehearsal, and preparing properly is a massive decreaser of anxiety for sure. Any others for you, Keeney? Is there any, have you ever been told any additional means of what you have to do to get over fear?
Yeah, I think just practice makes it better. That's what, everyone says. So yeah.
Cool.
I think the other one.
So being fear.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're right.
I'm thinking of the other one that helped me get over some fear.
Yep.
Is just to genuinely stay curious.
Yes.
That really helped me. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And that kind of taps into being the observer, right? Being slightly, if you're curious, then you're interested in it, but you're not so like totally attached to it and invested in like feeling the outcome, right? That can be another good one. Has anyone ever told anyone to just avoid it? Yeah. Have you ever heard any friends or any, like, every now and then I've heard stories from women leaders who are just like, oh, I hate driving on freeways, so I just don't drive on freeways, or I just hate driving, so I just don't drive. So it's like their strategy then becomes, I've heard psychologists talk about this before actually, who talk about trauma. They said one of their means of dealing with their anxiety around that, so they just avoid it completely. But the trade-off to that is, like you were saying, and if you, like, in terms of not facing it, does that then ever go away if we just run away from the beast? It can be a way, but at what point does it become adaptive, and what point might it impact us negatively? It's not, none of this is about right or wrong. It's just about thinking, what do we need in any given moment, right?
Yeah.
So we've done feel it, do it anyway, face it, to reduce it. Has anyone ever heard of the notion of channeling your fear into excitement instead? Channeling your adrenaline and all your nerves. It's one sort of flick of a thought away from flipping from fear into, oh, I'm terrified of this, to, woohoo, this is going to be awesome. Woohoo, I'm excited.
I think it's for athletics.
Yes, that's a big one for adrenaline junkies and a big one for athletes and people. It's one that I sort of tried. Another one, the next one, I've been very lucky to be a student of and to have had mentors at Thought Leaders Business School for on and off bits over the last 8 years. And I've been very privileged to, one of my favorite books, and one of the books that's on my shelf, was on my shelf, what have I done with it? Oh, there we go. Let me try and hold it up to the screen in there for you, is Speakership. And the lovely Matt Church and Cole Fink and Sasha Coburn in there, and at some point talk about the notion of, we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, replacing nervous with service, and having an intention instead around intending to think about, well, how can I help, rather than getting caught up in our anxieties around, what are people going to think of me? Am I going to be enough? Is this good? How am I going to do this? And all the things that can kind of take us into our own process. I used to do this as well when I was going on stage for musicals. I'd get to a point where I'd do all my preparation and I'd do me, and then I'd still have maybe half an hour or an hour, usually a bit longer, because it was a long wait sometimes. In high school musicals, for example, before I got to uni performances, like sometimes you had a bit of a gap between whatever you did in the afternoon and whenever the performance started, right? So then, like, while I was waiting backstage with everyone, we had to do something. So I'd do my preparation, and then I'd go, okay, so how can I help the younger students? How can I help the other people? Because I could see when they were nervous or they had stuff going on, or they were having trouble remembering lines or various things were going on. So I'd be like, okay, so how can I help them right now? And that was definitely really helpful for me, as well as at times just moving. And I'm borrowing this a little bit. I mean, I'd had that originally, and they talk about that in that book as well, of the benefit of movement, of even just you going for a walk around at times is just a means of channeling that excess energy into something, rather than you sitting there and stewing in it like this. Because in terms of our nervous system and what it's doing in those moments, we're releasing a tremendous amount of energy when we're activating the nervous system, and we're activating energy in order for us to be able to either fight or flee or do whatever we have to do. I mean, we're quick, biologically wired, genetically wired to have this really quick reaction and unleash this quick burst of energy to make sure that we're able to do that, right? And the tricky thing about that, though, is it's not adaptive in the modern day, when you have to sit around for waiting for presentations, or waiting to go on stage, or waiting to get on a Zoom meeting, or waiting to get on whatever the thing is, right? So then you get this excess energy that you've got to manage. But this ladder as well, so in addition to, and you were mentioning earlier about breathing, and as breathing being a key tool in kind of either how we breathe has the capacity to amp up and activate a fight-flight system, or fight-flight response in our nervous system, or it has the ability to calm us down, right? In terms of resetting the relaxation response, if we do diaphragmatic breathing, breathing from more like into focusing on raising our hands underneath, or raising our belly, raising in such a way, expanding and contracting in such a way that our hands expand with it, for our lower belly. It's for anyone who's not sure what we're talking about, so we're following along at home. That has the ability to calm us down, or if we take really short, shallow, sharp breaths into here, that will fire us up more. And in terms of the ladder, so this one, this is adapted from, I'm not sure of the other, it's sort of vaguely based on several other models I've seen, but I cannot think of the person to credit for this off the top of my head who came up with another version of this, but I rewrote it a little bit, because my personal experience in my life of having dealt with complex PTSD, I've journeyed every single rung on this ladder at some point, right? And for me, I feel like, so there's these extra layers on here in terms of, it's not just about fighting or scaring people off. There's also the fleeing, or it might be, if we can't flee, there's sometimes the response of crying. There's a response of hiding or freezing. And then there's the response where this gets stressful for long periods of time, and we actually kind of dissociate a bit. At first, your awareness goes really heightened, then it disconnects. And then there's the whole, have you ever seen fainting goats in the world, or fainting goat videos? There's the bit where you just completely lose consciousness and just flop and keel over, and actually lose consciousness as well as mobility. And the mobility can come before the consciousness. So yeah, there's layers to that. And then on the left-hand side is sort of, just briefly to explain it, we won't dwell here because I want to move on to the next bit. But it's like, in those zones, you're either in the survive, you're in the revive. In the dissociation, you're not really feeling things. It's protecting you from pain, and it's protecting you from overwhelm. And then when you're hiding and freezing, like, you might lose your voice because you need to do stillness. Whereas in the upper ones, you need to run away, or you need to yell, and you need to make a lot of sound. So it's kind of like a low energy state at the bottom, and then it's really high energy states at the top, in that respect. So part of the challenge then with all of those, fawning's another part of it. I don't think we've got time to go into it, but I just thought it was important to mention. What we're doing right now is rising up the rungs. There is a researcher called Peter Levine, who has done a lot of research on recovering from trauma and how to help heal when we get stuck in, for some people, if they've been through extremely traumatic events, which I had been through a few where I went down to the very bottom of this. And what ends up happening is later in life, just to try and give a brief summary of this, it's like that gets stored on the hard drive when you can't immediately deal with it in the moment. In immediately the moment, we have this opportunity. Our body has this beautiful response that it does where it shakes out the excess tension if we can't move or we can't get it out. Like we have this automatic shiver, shake response, which happens after numerous stressful events in life. Childbirth happens to kids in war zones. Doesn't so much happen to adults because adults have learned to repress it and hide it because we don't want to be seen to be weak or to be out of control. So we've learned to hold it in. And the problem with holding it in is that it doesn't go anywhere. That energy gets stuck there and is kind of just like stored sometimes, and then we've got to deal with it later. So part of what Peter Levine had talked about, he's got this 9-step process which talks about the importance of, for us to get over and permanently out of fight-flight mode and help break the loop of fear. If you've ever been through an event where you've experienced certain layers of this and got stuck there, it becomes important at some point to go back to the actually sitting with the experience of it, to feel that what's going on in your body and where you get stuck there, because otherwise it can keep operating, right? Like for an example of this, a little while ago, I was working at a contract where I was dealing with a manager who was quite verbally aggressive, and she was quite verbally attacking a few times, and it was getting to a point where like I had to be a little bit restrained in how I was reacting to this situation. And I just remember having a thought one day where it's just like I couldn't say what I really wanted to say without consequences to the relationship with this particular client. Where I just wanted to really call it like it was, but it was just like I needed to be mindful of just be careful about, just take a breather and think about how you're going to respond to this. But the trouble was, in the process of that, it went through my head, you have no power right now, you're powerless, right? And then that activated an old memory of a fight-flight incident for me where I had been powerless, where I'd been held down and been powerless. And then what I found my brain did over the next process of trying to keep talking to her, it's like I noticed that I was mentally going in this 12-second loop of I would keep trying to do things in this particular document we were working on for an agenda that we were working on, and I would keep trying to do steps of it, but I kept losing the plot after 12 seconds. Like my memory just blanked. It was like every 12 seconds I'd focus for a little bit and then I'd blank, and then 12 seconds and then blank, 12 seconds and then blank. And I couldn't at first work out what was going on, but then I remembered and I looked at this research and I was like, so that's what's going on. So it was like in that particular incident, what had happened was that I was alternating between being immobilized and nearly losing consciousness, but not losing it, but then adrenaline kicking in, trying to bring me back to see if I could run away, but I still couldn't. So then I'd nearly drop. So then I'd get adrenaline kicked back in. And what was going on in this moment, in this coping response when I was dealing with this particular person, was that 12-second loop was still playing out, right? Of my adrenaline trying to kick me back in to get me in, but my brain also then trying to dissociate and get out of there. And it was weird how it was just like it was still this imprint of it happening later, which is why I think it's such an important thing that we learn how to. Part of the remedy was just, again, for me to then be with that and realize what was going on in that, to be able to then, the key to moving beyond this is to be able to sit with that energy and then learn to come back, to rise your energy back up to the top of the ladder, back up through the layers, because it's de-energy, like it's low energy states at the bottom, and then you come back up to high energy states at the top. So it's a bit like you got to raise back up through it, right? That's part of the way to heal it. But that doesn't have to be done alone, because sometimes for people who've had this, and this may be for the benefit of people as well, not here on the webinar, but watching the replay, like that doesn't have to be done alone, because sometimes that can be quite stressful and it's hard to navigate by yourself. I've been a counselor, I've been trauma informed, I've been a therapist for a lot of years. So it's easy for me to kind of navigate my own process at this point. But for some people, it won't be, because they don't have as much awareness around how to do that. So it would be a lot scarier for them to just drop into something that's a memory from 20 years ago and they've got no idea what's going on. So when it starts coming up, like sometimes it can be handy to get someone else to help you with that, right? So that's another of the really important things for actually breaking out of the loop, is to actually have tools to actually manage the energy of the fight flight response itself, so as we can be with it and then we can regain some control over that response. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm not sure if any of the other ladies, do you have any thoughts, or is there anything you wanted to share before we move on to state beyond this? No, all good, all good. So how do we shift things? How do we shift things? So Anne, you mentioned earlier about breath. So breath's on. I did this other little model of some of the, these are like processes that we can do, or steps that we can do, actions that we can take that can help us shift our energy and shift our thinking and shift the state that we were in away from being in fear and back in the direction of being able to be in calm and be in clarity and feel coherent and in control and confident and back in alignment with our true selves, as opposed to dominated by the of fear or aggression, because aggression's like the other form that it comes out at times, right? If we don't go into the fear or we don't go into the crying, then aggression can be the top level. That's why I put it above it on the ladder, that keeps us out of going there. There's a lot of people in the world you'll see are really angsty right now because they're not dealing well with COVID. And it's a symptom of how stressed we are. And what's really underneath is there's something else that's going on that they're really stressed about and freaked out about, but it's coming out as anger, right? So this is all about shifting beyond that. And the steps in this model, it doesn't just operate in one direction, right? I mean, you could do a practice one day where you did all of them in one go, or you could work across the top of this from left to right on one row, and you doing that would still work. You doing 3 of them or you doing 1 of them would help shift it. It's just about picking the ones that work for you. I've got a whole other webinar where we go into this in much more depth because that is really fun to do, and to talk a bit more about what the ones are that work for you. Yeah, but I just wanted to give you a basic sort of intro on this one today. And just ask, we might do what I wanted to do, if you'd be so willing, is to do a quick kind of, I wanted to take you through a sort of meditation, visualization practice that we can do that can help shift your state really quickly. Would you all be okay if we were to give that a go? It'll only be a quick little thing, and it's just like a breath and visualization thing. But I thought we might just, as an example of one of the stages of how you can do this, I just wanted to do a quick one of those with you, if that's all right with everyone. Cool. Now, are you all right to just be here for the next couple of minutes, or this will just be it'll just be like a couple of minutes? Are you all right to just put things down, and you've got space and you've got room that you'll have a bit of privacy for a couple of minutes? Cool. All right. So I'll just invite you to then, whenever you're ready, if you're sitting somewhere comfy, just whenever you're ready, close your eyes. And I just want you to notice, while your eyes are closed, what you can hear. I want you to notice what you can hear in the world around you. And I just want you to notice your breath as well. What's your breath doing right now? Is it slow? Is it fast? Is it up here and shallow in your chest? Is it deeper and lower down and moving your lower belly? And how do you feel right now? You feel very mentally busy? Has anything kind of come up in the process of us talking about all that? What's going on in your body right now? And again, you don't need to go into it. It's just about noticing it, like we were talking about being curious and being the observer. So yeah, just noticing. And then I want you to just focus on just trying to take it a little bit deeper, your breath, down into your lower belly with each breath. With each breath in, I want you to imagine like fresh air, fresh energy, and more energy of you opening up within you, and you being energized and lighting back up with your essence, with who you are. And with each breath out, I want you to imagine all the angst of the day, any stress, any tension, anything that's gone on. I want you to just let it go, breathe it out with each breath. You don't need to carry it right now. Anything important you can come back to later. Just keep focusing on that for a little bit. And I just want you to think about what's one thing that you do just for the absolute love of it, just because you enjoy it, and maybe you've been doing it since you were little, but it's like if you had plenty of spare time and you had unlimited money tomorrow, what's a thing that you would do just because you can? And I want you to think of the first person who pops into your head who's someone that you really love, who you really care about. And who else comes to mind when you think of that? It's a thing that you did with them recently that lit you up and made you really, like, you just were feeling alive with, oh, I'm really so grateful for this person. I love them. Great. And then what is it that you have to be grateful for right now? In life, at home, at work. I want you to think of at least 2 things. And a third thing. And then I want you to just think of what you're really most passionate about in your work, your reason for being here. What is that? What drives you right now? What's your big why? And for any of you, if you're listening later, if you're a bit not sure, if you were to connect to the point in the future right now where you're completely living it and doing it and being that leader and being that speaker and serving the world in that way, what are you doing? You don't even have to know. Like, the trippy thing about this is that I just want you to imagine there being like a little line, like a cord from you, from here to there. I just want you to imagine whatever you did, like the plan of how you did that, what you had to do to get there. I want you to just imagine it coming back to you now and loading into you. And for all this good energy that we're cultivating right now, I want you to imagine your body, a little icon of it, a bit like on your phone, of the phone battery. I want you just imagine just filling up from your feet all the way up, 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 through your legs, up through your hips, up through your upper body, up through your chest, running down into your arms and back up again, up into your head, all the way through your back and your backside as well as your front, and all the way up into your head, filling up, 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 all the way to the top. Beautiful. Now I just want you to notice the world around you, again, what you can hear, how your feet feel, how your body feels on the chair. And if you haven't already, I just want you to bring your attention back into the room, bring your energy back. And whenever you're ready, or if you haven't already, just open your eyes and rejoin us. You might want to just imagine your feet being on the ground and just grounding yourself back onto feeling your feet on the ground again. Sometimes that can make you a little bit lightheaded and off the fairies a bit when you do that. moving all that energy. Yeah, I'm curious to hear, how was that for you, just as a process for everyone? Did you want to unmute anyone and share, or pop your hand up if you wanted to share something? It's okay if you don't want to as well. But what I really want you to get from that is just how quickly and easily we can just ask ourselves a question while we're going through a little process around that, and just how quick and easy it is to shift, right? Did you want to share something, Anne? No? Cool. Okay. So yeah, and you can do any one of those things, and we will talk about them a little bit more on a later webinar to come up with sort of a plan that works for you personally on those. But yeah, I just want you to think about, as a bit of a takeaway from this. So what is one of those things that you can do the next time that you're stressed, or the next time that you're anxious? What's one of those things that you can do at home or at work to help lift your energy and shift your state out of the fear next time? If you want to make a note of it somewhere and make a little commitment to yourself, feel free.
Zoom in.
Okay. So do any of you have any questions, or is there any questions that you had before you came relative to our topic today that I haven't covered, or that you'd like to ask for our last few minutes of the process today? Anyone have any additional questions? No? All good. So do you each want to, I just want you to think about, what's one thing that you've got out of today? What's one thing that you've learned, or one insight that you've got? Did you want to just jump on and share with us?
I can make dinner. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're right. Keeney, is there any one particular thing that struck you about today that's a new thing that you've learned, or something that you've remembered?
I guess it's just the that women, for whatever reason, I think, in the society, are afraid to speak up, or just feel sort of hesitate to do so. Yeah, I mean, that didn't well, how do I say it? Like, I guess, it's obviously more obvious when you talk about it today. So it's interesting to learn that.
Beautiful. And across cultures, like, that's worse for some cultures, more exacerbated for some cultures than others, right? Depending on where they're at. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that insight today. Anne, was there something, what's one thing that you've taken away from today?
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Sorry.
I can. Okay.
Well, I think just to I think it's just really important to be yourself, because like, as I was talking about, there's a lot of stereotypes in leadership, and yeah, I think it's just really important to remember who you are, I think that's critical, actually. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Because you know, there's only one of you, so that's actually enough, to be honest.
And there's no, I think we sort of established today too, there's no one who's exactly like you, right? Anywhere ever. No one can even attempt to try to be like you. Even you line up 7 people in the same occupation doing the same thing, and every one of them is slightly different and does it in a different way. And that's beautiful about humans, right?
Yeah.
Embrace your uniqueness, for sure. Love it. Thank you. Anything else?
I think that's, yeah, I mean, the tips for overcoming fear were good. You know, I think that's it. That's the gist of it for me. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Shani, are you still with us?
She went.
In the background? You're in the background. I know we're getting on into the evening and I've kept you for a while tonight. So I'd love to thank you all so much for taking the time to be here on an evening. I know it gets a bit trickier once you're pushing upwards of the 8:30 mark, like the time. It's more than 9 o'clock where it kicks in, but I know for the mental capacity to follow along, like it's a little bit trickier at this time of night. So thank you to you all for being here and following along today. And yeah, so I just want you to, again, just think about one thing that you're going to continue to do now or implement after you've listened to this today. What has this inspired you to change, or what will you do more of in terms of practices? And I think I've got for all of you, I think I've got you all registered on Eventbrite, but that was just a reminder to me, just in case that you didn't and you wanted to receive the replay. Feel free to just send me a message or pop it in the chat if I don't already have it, but I think I have all of yours, so I don't think we need to worry about that too much. The other thing I was just going to say, if you have any afterthoughts, or if anyone watching this later has any afterthoughts in terms of if you have questions following on from this, or if somebody watching this later, something comes up for you and you want to chat through it, or if you want to learn a little bit more about how you can actually implement this in your everyday working life, if you do happen to be dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety and you want some deeper strategies around how to deal with that and manage your state, then by all means feel free to. I will pop in the recording and the email out with this as well, so you don't have to awkwardly try and scroll and write this down. But you're most welcome to jump on my calendar and book in for either, if you're interested in doing some sessions, you can book in for the 30-minute application call, which we can talk a little bit more about which specific kinds of sessions might help you, or alternatively, because I work really collaboratively in the case management sense as well. So if I think there's someone else who's a really good fit for you, who'd be able to help with that as well, I'm certainly going to suggest that to you quite proactively, because I feel like it takes a whole team. It takes a whole village to raise a child, and in terms of a leader and a thought leader, I'm an avid believer that it takes a whole village to create a thought leader and a leader as well, right? So yeah, that's always a resource there. And if you have quick questions, you can always just book in for my quick up to 15-minute call as well, and we can just jump on and have a quick chat about whatever comes up on a webinar or something that you see. If I'm talking about a blog or something, or you just have an afterthought beyond this, you're like, oh, I didn't ask about that thing, feel free to, I will give you the other link for my calendar, so you can just book in and we can have a chat. So that's pretty much it for the day, my loves. I'd like to thank you so much for giving up your evening again and taking the time to be with us today. And those of you watching later, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this through. Really appreciate you being here too. And yeah, I will now, feel free to just jump on, and if you want to say anything as we're finishing up to anyone, feel free to do, but I think I shall now let you go to enjoy the rest of your evenings, ladies.
Oh, thank you, Nat. Sorry, my daughter just came back.
No, it's okay. Totally appreciate that we're operating in a family-friendly time of night. So totally happy to accommodate that at any time. It's all good. And thank you so much. Thank you for being here. It's been great to have you all.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I look forward to chatting to you all soon. Have a good night, all. Lots of love. Chat soon.